What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a mega crossover episode of Hardwood Knocks times the NBA podcast. We have the certified fantabulous Mr. Grant Hughes. We have the equally certified fantabulous Mr. Mort Jensen. We are here to talk about absolutely nothing because nothing's happened over the NBA in the past couple of days. But we've both our shows have done Luka Doncic, Lakers, Mavericks content already. We're here to talk Zach LaVine to the Kings, De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs, and contracts that other teams did not want to the Bulls. Guess first or Mort, how are you doing before we dive into this?
Well, I'm doing a little bit better. After Paris, I got hit hard, and now the whole family is down for the count. But it's look, when you get hit with a Luka Doncic trade out of nowhere, which is followed up by De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine, and everything, your entire health is like, okay, fuck it, let's get back on track because we need to be rolling with this one. So thank you to the NBA for forcing me into a 16-hour workday yesterday. It got all the juices flowing in all the right ways.
I felt the same way, except then I'll sit back and remember being like, I could be doing something that's actually difficult or matters in life, and then I feel less bad. Like I'm not doing manual labor for 18 hours. Grant, you were doing manual labor, I believe. How are you doing?
I'm just trying to decide if I need to get out my old Kevin Durant Warriors jersey or buy a LeBron one. What do the custom ones cost? Like, I don't know.
No. Sounds like you should get both.
See, right? Is that mathematically possible? We'll see. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. This is I'm excited to talk about this trade because it might make more sense than the one we've all spent a lot of time trying to parse and coming to no logical conclusions about.
So I will begin with the details, and then let's go alphabetically here. We'll start with the Bulls after the full trade details, though, for anyone who's potentially living under a rock and has not seen them yet. But in the three-team trade, the Chicago Bulls are receiving Zach Collins, Kevin Huerter, Trey Jones, and their own 2025 first-round pick. It was owed to San Antonio with top 10 protection and then top 8 for the following 2 years. They just now got it back outright. The Kings receive Sidi Sissoko, Zach LaVine, Charlotte's 2025 first, but it's actually going to be 2 seconds in 2026 and 2027. They will get Chicago's second-round pick this year, San Antonio's 2027 first-round pick unprotected, Denver's 2028 second-round pick with top 33 protection. That comes from San Antonio. A 2028 second-round pick, its own, that came via Chicago. And then they get Minnesota's 2031 first-round pick from San Antonio. The Spurs receive De'Aaron Fox and the big name we all want to talk about, Jordan McLaughlin. Mort, I will start with you this is just a lot happening. I found it funny that the Kings thought maybe they could sneak in some business under the Luka Doncic to the Lakers wave. But what did you make of this for Chicago specifically?
Well, I mean, look, they didn't get a whole lot back, and I'm still flabbergasted at where LaVine's value ended up being because he is genuinely good. I think the NBA the NBA sphere at large has just grown way too negative about him. So I'm sort of like in that place where I'm understanding of the fact that the Bulls just didn't have a lot of maneuverability with him. Like that's just how the market kind of shook out. But at the same time, I'm looking at Zach LaVine, one of arguably the second best shooting guard in Bulls history, one of the most efficient, high scoring guards over the past, 7 years, who went for a bag of peanuts. And that's unacceptable. And you can sit there and say, well, the market shook out the way it did. I don't care. If you are a front office, it's your job to get bang for the buck in whatever capacity you need to do so. So I gave them a D- over at Yahoo Sports. I think what they got back was just a bunch of BS. And I have this thing for you. This is courtesy of Elias Schuster, who basically collected everything over the past couple of years. And he said here, the Bulls have traded DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey, Kevin Huerter, Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Chris Duarte, 2 second-round picks, and rights to their own 2025 first-round draft pick back. That means not a single additional first-round draft pick was acquired for DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Alex Caruso. It's malpractice, but that's just part of the norm for the Bulls. I mean, I understand that they're trying to save money, I think, and get worse, like, oh, we'll play the lottery, but then go full out. Like, if that's your plan, then it's unacceptable you didn't get more for Alex Caruso back in the day. It's unacceptable that you can't squeeze out more assets when you have beneficial situations. Like Dan, you and talked about this before. Kobe White should be traded right now because his trade value is only going to decline moving further. I mean, look, right now his value before the trade deadline is going to be higher than this summer because teams trading for him, or even Ayo Dosunmu as well, will have two playoff rounds or 2 playoff years instead of 1. So I'm hoping they're not done. I'm hoping that they somehow salvage this by trading Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu for a ton of draft equity because they need to. I understand going all in for Cooper Flagg. Sure, that's still a gamble. Like, you need to have more bites at the apple.
How you feeling, Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I just wonder. So, would you guys agree that Bulls own 25 first that came back is the quote unquote crown jewel of the return here? I mean, unless you consider just not paying Zach LaVine to be the main driver of this, which fine. Congratulations, you took on $36 million in salary next year in the contracts you took back too. So that's $10 million there.
They're going to get a trade exception from Kevin Herter.
Okay,
like,
sorry, the trade. Maybe that's the crown jewel. So I just, in keeping with what Mort said and what we've discussed plenty, Dan, is like, yeah, this can't just be the Bulls' plans going into this deadline. Should not and better not just be move LaVine, especially if the goal is to maximize the value of this first rounder you got back, because the protections on it were such that had you just traded, you don't even need to trade LaVine right now, is my point. Trade Kobe White, trade Vucevic. LaVine gets a back soreness, and you tank hard enough to maximize the value of the pick that's got top 10 protection that you're keeping anyway. You readdress trading LaVine in the offseason or down the road. I think the only way the Bulls can defend this is to say that LaVine's value was not going to get higher than it is right now. I don't agree with that. I just think that there's, and if that is true, then I still think it just doesn't justify what they got back. So I don't know what letter grade I'd give it. It's certainly a below average one. I can't get past the idea that this pick is what the Bulls seem to want. And there was a way for them to essentially keep it, perhaps indefinitely, if you really wanted to steer into the skid for multiple years, which is what they should do anyway. So I don't love it. I guess it came down to, we can loop ourselves into this trade that just seems inevitable between Sacramento and San Antonio, and San Antonio has our pick and we want it. What do you think though, Dan, about like the idea that what you've protected yourself from is conveying the number 11 pick, or something like that? If you're the Bulls, like that just doesn't seem like enough motivation to me.
I think it rings hollow, and I struggle with how to evaluate it against their past decisions. I think what Mort brought up about the Caruso trade, that if you were going to go this route that you did with Zach LaVine, why weren't picks a priority in the Caruso trade then? And I think that's a fair criticism. I actually had to grade this trade too, and I gave them a C-, and I actually had read Mort's, so he's a little bit lower. The thing that I wonder if we're discounting, or the two things would be, like you mentioned it, Grant, because there were out years on those protections, like they are just now unencumbered when it comes to their own first round picks. There's value in that, because you could theoretically be bad, but if you're like the 5th worst team in the league, there's a chance that you still lose that. It's minute, but like there's a chance that you would still lose that pick. And the other thing, which this might speak to the low baseline against which I judge this front office, it does seem to me that they're going to do something. You don't make this trade and then do nothing else. Now, do I think they'll trade Kobe White? Nothing will surprise me anymore after Luka Doncic was traded. So, but I don't expect them to trade Kobe White. It does like make me think though, okay, like they're going to get rid of not just guys because they're helping them win, but they're not just going to hold on to guys and try and chase that 10 seed and not think beyond this year and go year by year. So it's fair to, I think, critique them for their past mistakes. I actually was a little bit surprised that Zach LaVine couldn't get you more in a vacuum, but I mean, when we have the Mavericks wondering whether they think Luka Doncic is worth paying moving forward, it makes me wonder, okay, well, how are teams viewing the final 2 years and $95 million or whatever it is left on Zach LaVine's deal? So I don't think this was a good return, but I think you can argue it was, even if it wasn't a necessary return, it is at least semi-encouraging that it seems like this team might actually be for once prioritizing the bigger picture.
I agree that is the macro defense you can make for the Bulls, is they can stand up to critics like us and say, you've been telling us to sell forever, like, and choose a direction. We did it. I know you don't like how we did it, but we did it, right? Like that. I think if you're going to be defensive on the Bulls' behalf, that's a reasonable case to make. And then I know we don't like the argument, but the market just was what it was, and this is the best you could do. And sorry that it wasn't more favorable.
So, Greg, you said something along the lines that the Bulls were the team that wanted to like loop themselves into this deal. I'm kind of thinking, because the Kings and the Spurs have dealt with Chicago in recent years and have done so pretty effectively. I'm wondering if they wanted to loop them in to just feast the fuck out of them.
That I saw somebody tweeted something to the effect of like the Spurs saw the two suckers at the table and just keep making bets with them. Like that's really what San Antonio is, just a predatory trade partner at this point. And like, I mean, considering how things have turned out when you make trades with the Kings and the Bulls, like not the worst strategy.
Right. No, and the thing is, I've actually heard this before. Like I've never had it like confirmed from multiple sources, but I have heard that the Bulls, among many teams, are like one of the first calls. Just like that's the team you kind of throw shit up against the wall and just like, hey, Arturas, my bestest friend, would you like to listen to this trade offer that just rings off the top of my head? And because there's like a non-zero chance, he just says, sure, I'll do it. I'll call my owner first. Like, it's just, man, that franchise, I feel so bad for Bulls fans. Truly, I do. Like, I understand why the apathy level is so high right now. I was just scrolling through Twitter last night when this whole thing went through. There was like no reaction. There's just like no. Zach LaVine had been there for 7 years. People loved him. They were like, yeah, all right, that happened. It's just like the most saddest crowd ever. Like something good has to fall Chicago's way soon, just for the fan base, not for the organization, because screw them, but for the fans, they deserve something now.
Will your impressions of this trade change at all more if the Bulls do absolutely nothing before the deadline versus if they like? Does it change at all based on what they could still do at the deadline? Whether it's move Kobe White, move Vooch, and we probably even shouldn't spend too much time on it because they might be moved by the time we're done recording this.
Right. Yes and no. So I never subscribed to the idea that you make a move that's bad and then you follow it up with a good one, and then we like in the aggregate have to like say, oh, this is great. Like, no, you also have to nail the individual moves. Like if you're losing one and then win another one, that's just 1-1. It's not like 2-0. It's like you split it. So this particular trade, that's not going to change my mind. Like they should have gotten more back. I do think this points to Vooch though getting moved, because Jalen Smith is there now. Zach Collins is there. I don't think they're going to run with 3 centers for the rest of the year. Apparently Golden State has just asked for everyone who's like falls within the circle of star adjacent. I don't even want to call Vooch that, but I think if you squint a little bit and look at the percentages this year, even though they're dropping, let's not talk about that. You might be able to talk your way into that, but like, what's the upside there? An expiring contract, perhaps, and a couple second rounders. Like, okay, is that going to make any necessary needle moves for the future? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think you downward adjust your expectations, right? If this is what you're getting for LaVine, then and if you can move Vucevic, I think, again, trying to keep expectations like relative to the deals that have happened, even though the Doncic thing, I think, needs to be its separate class of deal. We don't draw any conclusions about league-wide trends from that deal. I think that's a one-off. But I think if you can move Vucevic for, say, the Warriors' mostly expiring, cobbled together salaries and a second, I mean, that doesn't seem bad. It's not an objectively good move, but relative to what you've just gotten for LaVine, maybe that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
Do you think that there might be value in Vooch would fall into this because he's the mid-end contract that's on the books for like $20-something million? And my first instinct of this trade was they take back both Kevin Huerter and Zach Collins, but unless like we know what free agency is now, and we know how trades work, even when they're lopsided, like very rarely, like you need money to go out to do something. And so with 1 year left, you get out from the final year of Zach LaVine's deal. I don't know if this front office thinks in those terms, but now we have a bunch of these, like if a team this offseason, when more teams presumably will be looking to do stuff, you now have all this different type of salary matching fodder or ballast to then enter the market to become a dumping ground, or like maybe snake in and get an opportunity for a player that another team doesn't want. I don't know if they're thinking in those terms, but that would be the only logic I could see behind keeping Vooch into
you are giving them way too much credit. You're giving like just the fact of like, taking back players with long-term contracts for compensation of draft picks. Is that allowed? Is going to be their response. I mean, you're talking
They
about
just did it.
Well, I mean, did they really? Was that their intent? Or were they just like looking at a bunch of offers and just go, well, we feel this is the best? I just don't have any faith whatsoever in this front office doing anything of significant value. Like, honestly, I'm at that point where if the Bulls have decided now to fully enter into a rebuild, I think now's the time to switch front office, because do I trust this current administration to actually succeed in building up a new version of the Bulls? Hell no, absolutely not. This is a team that couldn't even squeeze a second out of OKC for Alex Caruso. I'm sorry, but like I keep going back to that because that was the smoking gun for me. Like, I've always known they were bad negotiators. I've always heard the noise, but like the fact that they pulled that, it's just like, it's egregious. And now again, it's like you're taking on long-term money and you're only getting your own pick back. Like, again, no additional first rounders for
You actually gave
DeMar,
up a second rounder as part of this deal too.
Look, and that's the thing. So many people don't know John Paxson is still part of the organization. He's like an advisor and whatnot. Many years ago, he was out basically saying a second rounder, like the inclusion of a second rounder, is never going to change my mind on the trade. Like, if that's what it takes for us to get a trade done, we'll give that to bad boy up. Like, okay, fine. That shows me how you look at draft picks. Like, it's candy. You'll throw it that way. It's not important to you. This new front office reeks of the same. It's Garpax 2.0. So like, we can sit here and go, oh, what are Chicago's long-term plans? I'm just like, in 2 years, you're going to be right back where we are right now. Doesn't matter what their long-term plans are. It really doesn't matter.
I guess I don't disagree with it. I'm sorry, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but do we, and I mean, this is to the two of you, but like with Alex Caruso, we knew the market for him was different than the return that they got. With LaVine, the reporting has just always been that they weren't, like, people wanted, you have to attach something to get rid of him. And so I guess I would be more inclined to really, like, because I'm about to hammer the Kings when we get to them, I'd be really inclined to hammer the Bulls if I thought that there was an alternative outcome here for them. And I guess just because if we rewind it, let's say 2 off seasons ago, before he got injured last year, are we sure that like the market for him would have been a lot better? I guess maybe. I'm just curious as to like, if we're going to hammer them for this specific return, like, what do we think like with Alex Caruso, just as the example, like, we knew there would have been a package that had at least a pick, if not 2. And we knew at some point there were multiple first round picks on the table. I struggled to see the teams we wanted to trade for Zach LaVine, by and large, were never going to trade for Zach LaVine.
No, but then Grant kind of nailed it. He said, then you could flip Kobe White, I'd assume, with those guys. Like, you could lead the tank with Zach in charge. And it's always easier to make trades in the offseason as opposed to in season. And come the offseason, you have 1 full year of Zach LaVine's salary, the compensation level off. So like his deal is shortened by a year at that point in time. At least try it. There was no rush to get out of Zach LaVine. That's the kind of, I think Grant just nailed it here. There was no rush for them to say, oh, like, we're winning too much because of Zach LaVine. Like, no, you're doing pretty awful just with him in the lineup as well, because you can't construct a proper roster. What they should have done was exactly like move off of Kobe, move off of Ayo while they have value and great value, because their contracts are like chef's kiss. They're perfect, especially for competing teams that are a little bit rich at this point. You could have given up so much, or you could have taken so many draft assets in that regard, and then just rolled with Zach for the rest of the year. They would have been bad regardless. Go into 2025 offseason where everyone is a little bit mellow. Everyone's like, oh, okay, we can actually do 5-for-1 deals, 4-for-1 deals if that's what we want to do. Like, kick the can down the road to Zach, like, instead of panic trade him, in a deadline. They have no vision.
Graham, you were going to say something before I interrupted you?
I was just going to say, like, well, as Mort was talking, I wondered, like, could you just offer Kobe White to the Spurs for that 25 first back? Like, I don't know, maybe that, if you wanted to just kind of simplify this whole process, maybe that could have been the way. And then you hold on.
Right. I love you so much. I love you so much, because I've been pitching that for about a year now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I was just going to say, like, I totally agree that, this front office, and you mentioned Garpax 2.0. So really 2 front offices have kind of established what their priorities are. And that just makes me think we need to kick the blame up the org chart to ownership, because that's the constant. And if the argument, I think, and it's a fair one, is that this sort of behavior has defined the Bulls for, what amounts to more than one managerial or, front office tenure, then it's ownership. And then that's bleaker because that's way less likely to change than the front office. That's all. I just wanted to rain even harder on any kind of Bulls parade that might or might not be happening.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. I am one of the first ones to bring that up as well. It's so depressing because this is a team that's going to go into like inheritance. It's going to go down to kids. Like Bulls fans already know the name of like Jerry Reinsdorf's grandchild, Joey, who are just like, oh yeah, he's going to take that. That's where we are. And apparently, I read somewhere, I think about a year ago or something like that, that the ownership group's primary source of income now is not outside of the Bulls. It is the Bulls.
That's not
so
good.
That means there's less incentive to move off of that because they're still printing money off of the Bulls brand. They're printing money, and you'll go anywhere, like even in Europe, wherever there's like, I just came back from Paris, for example. It should have been loaded with Wemby jerseys, and of course it was, but like the second team in like the whole city picture, without a shadow of a doubt, Bulls gear everywhere, Bulls caps, Bulls jerseys, and I say also this like Air Jordan brand, because that still has a thing over here. They're printing money. So that ownership group is not going to sell unless someone comes in, with one of those, now you have my attention kind of offers.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to the Sacramento Kings?
I'm ready for you to go in.
Well, we're going to start with you, Grant, because the Sacramento Kings are your team, as we've established multiple times in this podcast. Just to review, for anyone who might be skipping around. So to Sacramento, we have CD Sissoko, Zach LaVine, Charlotte's 2025 first, which will be 2 seconds, Chicago's 2025 second, San Antonio's 2027 first, Denver's 2028 second, top 33 protection, their own 2028 second round pick. Chicago initially had that, and then Minnesota's 2031 first round pick. And then they are sending out De'Aaron Fox and Jordan McLaughlin. Grant, your reaction when we were texting about this trade when it first went down was just, maybe you were just you held everything to the Luka Doncic to the Lakers bar. And so like maybe you seem nonplussed about this one though.
I think that's a factor for sure. I don't know how to like recalibrate my expectations for trades anymore. I think so. So let's start with this. I think I agree with more that Zach LaVine, the needle went way too far toward the negative on Zach LaVine. I think Zach LaVine is a really, really good offensive player who makes sense for a lot of teams. And I think his value had sunk too low. I think he is the exact wrong kind of player for the Kings to be targeting, just because one, like, congrats, you've reassembled the DeRozan LaVine tandem that got you 10th in the East for several years in a row, and now you're like, it's too perfect that was thought to be a good idea by the Kings, who just continue to build rosters that seem like fantasy rosters, I guess. So I like Zach LaVine the player. I think that if this were another team getting him for this package, I'd feel better about it. I just don't love the fit. I guess it's possible, since I just made the argument, that if you hold on to Zach LaVine as the Bulls, his value increases. And so it follows that the Kings may be able to flip him for something. Doesn't feel like a player they added to flip, because if they were interested in flipping for draft assets, there are other constructions you could get into with the Spurs where you bring back rebuildy type pieces. That does not seem to have been the impetus here. So I don't like any of the picks. We've gone over it. The 2031 Minnesota first, I suppose, is the best, but there's almost no chance this front office is here to enjoy whatever that becomes. So, I guess in some ways you could credit them for taking a long view. Like, that's a good asset to have. Great. That Charlotte first is as fake of a first as has ever existed. And the Spurs first, if things don't go totally sideways, is in the mid to late 20s. So you got off Kevin. Let's say the positives. You got off Kevin Huerter's money. You didn't have to take back Zach Collins, which is nice. You would maybe have seen that as a possibility somehow. I'm just unmoved by it. I think it's okay. I think there's clearly more moves to be made by the Kings now, who don't have point guards, unless you think Devin Carter is really ready and Malik Monk can do that. I think ultimately, and we've talked about this a little, if this was the best you could do for De'Aaron Fox, you wait until the offseason again. And that's it's a crutch of an argument to make, because we don't know what was better that might have been out there in a couple months or a few months. I'm not persuaded that this was the best you were ever going to do when trading De'Aaron Fox. I guess that's where I'd leave it.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to get more thoughts in a second because we diverged a lot on this one. I think this is despicable business by Sacramento here.
What
And
specifically do you not like about it? Like, what's
you
the worst aspect?
Well, it's a continuation of what they've been
Yeah.
doing where let's forget about the part where the De'Aaron Fox situation was probably salvageable. Like this is years of built up, like you screwed up the way the Mike Brown situation was handled. You didn't deflect blame from him enough with that was pretty bad. Now, what has been our biggest complaints with this roster over and over again is that they have ignored the biggest needs for years, which was getting at least another wing type of player and a change up like reserve big or maybe even someone up front who could play next to Sabonis. Now you go through a trade and what you did is what you did over the offseason where you addressed preserving or maybe upgrading the status quo of your strengths on offense. And I think that Zach LaVine is a floor spacing upgrade over De'Aaron Fox. He's a better off the dribble 3-point shooter. He's going to give you the same, if not more, rim pressure. And he's the better off ball shooter as well. At the same time, there's a playmaking deficit here. And for anyone, I did acknowledge this, like, okay, you have Sabonis and Monk and even LaVine and DeRozan as well to bridge that gap. Sabonis and DeMar DeRozan have been two of the easiest players to game plan around in the postseason when they've entered the playoffs. You've now added Malik Monk. He's really good. I don't view him as just like, okay, he's going to go up against other teams' best lineups, break down the defense and set everybody up. De'Aaron Fox, we know Zach LaVine's not that guy. He's like a tertiary type playmaker, which is fine. You've now, as big of complaints we have as De'Aaron Fox's inconsistency, you are worse on defense. Like lifts for Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray just got a lot heavier. And you could say, all right, Devin Carter's now in the pipeline and playing. Awesome. You don't like, you're still looking at, all right, well, where's the wing? Where's the different type of reserve bigs? And are you confident that lineups with DeRozan and LaVine and even Monk, if they're going to play them together, like, are you confident in what you're going to have behind them, which is going to be Keegan Murray? And that's basically it because that's not what Sabonis does. You got, Grant already said this, you have maybe one premium asset out of this deal. And that's only because would Anthony Edwards leave Minnesota? Like that was the lottery ticket kind of on Minnesota's pick. And maybe they'll age out and go through years of turmoil or whatever. But you couldn't even get, I think this was the big mark for me. You couldn't even get San Antonio's 2025 first. You got their 2027 first. Like that 2025 first, even after this trade, could theoretically still be a lottery pick. And you couldn't get that. The only thing I recognize is De'Aaron Fox wanted to go to San Antonio. Maybe the market wasn't as expansive for his services. But to Grant's point, then you just wait for the offseason, and I bet like something similar is on the table from San Antonio. If not, maybe there are more teams willing to roll the dice on De'Aaron Fox, who, by the way, never came close to giving off like Jimmy Butler withholding services vibes or telling other teams he wouldn't sign with them outright. And so if you're a Kings fan, I feel bad for you, and I would be wildly disenchanted with this franchise because even if what you've done is kind of tread water for the regular season, I don't know how you look at this roster as currently constructed and think that it's better fit for the postseason. And finally, the fact that this front office was allowed to make this move when they are responsible for bumbling the De'Aaron Fox situation and repeatedly ignoring or failing to address or touting their almost acquisitions of all these players who would have helped them is just, it's a farce to me. And so the return on balance, given the circumstances, probably isn't terrible, but you've just now missed on way too many fronts over the past more than a year, but even just kind of like isolating it to this season, just everything from the start of the demise with Mike Brown and his extension to the way this De'Aaron Fox situation was handled to the negotiate. No, none of the Spurs is young. Like you couldn't get a Keldon Johnson out of this. Like, no, like, okay, Steph Castle off limits. Like you don't even get a flyer on like Malachi Branham or Blake Wesley. Maybe you didn't want that, but like Jeremy Sohan, like I just a complete failure organizationally on this part, on their part.
I don't want to step on what I imagine if Mort, you're a little less rough on the Kings here on some of the points you might want to make, but just to argue against myself a little bit, I do wonder if we are giving enough weight to the Spurs, just like incomprehensible amount of leverage here where they can set the price, tell the Kings, we're going to sign him when he leaves. So take this now, or this is all you're going to get. Now, the Kings probably still should have called that bluff, I think, and waited till the offseason. But that's the best way for me to rationalize this from Sacramento's perspective. I don't know if I agree with that. I think maybe you do call that bluff and the offer does get better, but I imagine that that's a component of this from the Spurs side. More, go ahead. Sorry to step on it.
No, it's fine, because I think the leverage point is totally fair. It's one that I've been clamoring on like for a while now, since the news broke that he wanted to go there. I gave the trade an A for the Kings, and I did so because while I agree with you, Dan, in terms of, oh, they probably should have kept him, they probably should have rolled it into the offseason and whatnot, that's not how I can approach a trade. Like, I'm going to grade what actually, like, the return and only the return. Like Zach LaVine, again, I've been saying this. I think he's grotesquely underrated. I've actually wanted him on the Kings for a year and a half now. Now, granted, I wanted to pair him with Fox and Sabonis. I didn't want him to be paired up with DeMar DeRozan. So this is like one of those situations where, okay, like we can talk about the fit. But I do think that in a sped up offense and actually having a LaVine to be installed next to is Sabonis an elite playmaker or just like borderline elite, whatever it is. I don't think LaVine has ever played with a playmaker like this. We can argue Lonzo, but there was like a 35 game sample when he was healthy and then, missed 2.5 years. So I don't think that really counts. Now, LaVine, who's for 3 years were one of the best off-ball players in the league, not just spotting up, but also like cutting. He's going to have a field day playing off of Sabonis. So like, if you want to be competitive, and clearly the Kings are not looking to take a major step back by doing this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken on LaVine. So I have to grade it through that perspective. Now, should they have gone in a different direction? Yes, absolutely. Because if you're trading away De'Aaron Fox, you should have basically said, look, that's not just the franchise, but that's a pretty good segue for us to go into a rebuilding process. But that's not what they wanted to do. So I have to grade them on what they are trying to do. And they got a volume spacer in there, which they've lacked for a long while now, who can play off of elite playmakers, who can play off ball, who isn't going to, take over possessions again and again and again. And yes, I understand that the draft picks aren't necessarily great. I get that. I will say that the 31 Minnesota, and Grant, you mentioned it, I dig that. That's going to be a genuine trade asset, in my opinion, because I have a hard time seeing Minnesota basically keeping Anthony Davis. Wow, we're trading Anthony Davis once again. Anthony Edwards at this rate. So I think, given the ledge that San Antonio held here, given the situation that they were in, and I can't sit here and say that, oh, was it really that bad behind the scenes? I don't think so. I have no idea. Like, we have no idea what the hell went on. We have no idea if De'Aaron Fox and Monty McNair got into a fist fight. We have no idea what happened behind the scenes. The fact that this all materialized so quickly makes me believe that there's something behind it that we are not privy to yet. So I think, given all that context, they did pretty well. And they also got off Kevin Huerter's deal. Like, I don't think that's nothing either. Would I have wanted more if I'm the Kings? Yes. Of course I would, but if this is what the market basically maximized me at right now, and I wanted to make a deal right now, I can't hate the return. I just can't.
Can I ask you a genuine question? I'm not even trying to be an asshole here. Why is that different from the way we would be evaluating what the Bulls did with Zach LaVine right now? Because I feel like you're emphasizing like we have to exist in the present, right? So we can't be too critical for the Bulls of their past mistakes, or the Kings for their past mistakes. But like the Bulls, it was, look at all this stuff that they've done that's bad. Like, we have to hammer them for the way that they handled the Zach LaVine trade.
Well, so you're arguing that because the Kings have a poor track record,
like, why would you trust this front office? I mean, Chicago's not over Chicago's front office, but like, they've decided that, oh, it didn't work with LaVine and DeRozan and a defensive liability at center in Chicago, but maybe it works here.
Totally fair question. I think what lends me some credence to this is the fact that they actually did pretty well a couple years back and actually looked like they were heading towards some kind of identity. But I do agree with you, because Kings fans, and rightfully so, were asking the question, should this front office be the one handling a rebuild? But they're not going to enter a rebuild from what we're seeing right now. Like, otherwise you're not trading for Zach LaVine. So I'm basically saying, oh, look, given the context of the situation, let them go into that, see where it shakes out. And look, this, again, grades are always fluid, right? Like, I'm giving them an A based on the situation because I think they were backed into a corner here. I think, like, De'Aaron Fox is also represented by Clutch, and we know that when Clutch wants something, they usually get it. I think this is one of those deals that are so difficult to maneuver and for them to actually get a player in return who I think is, all-star caliber player, as well as, can we say 2.5 first rounders because of that Charlotte one, perhaps?
They did get a lot of the Charlotte seconds could be pretty good. And
Right.
they probably got they got some intriguing seconds.
Yes. They actually did pretty well in replenishing their draft cupboard is kind of my point here. So I'm just not left with this bad taste in my mouth because I'm very much assuming that their backs were up against the wall. But I do think you raise a very good point, because if it comes to the Kings having to face facts and say, all right, we have to enter a rebuild, should they trust Monty McNair and everyone there to conduct that?
No, I mean, it's clear you both already said this, but it's made even more clear by the return on this trade that they have no plans to do that. They couldn't even get, and maybe, I mean, this is the Spurs being smart. The Kings couldn't even get their own pick swap back.
Right.
Like, how, honestly, if San Antonio would have put that on the table, how much of that, Grant, would it have been worth? Like, what would you have been allowed to have been taken out of this trade if San Antonio put the 2030 swap? Like, you could have the rights back to your 2030 pick on the table.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd say in a specific answer to that, but that I'd rather have that than. Would you rather have that than both the San Antonio first and the Minnesota and certainly I'd give me that over the Charlotte quote unquote first and the San Antonio first, I think. Although that's another one that's so far off, kind of like the 2031 Minnesota pick, where Monty McNair's got to be thinking like that's somebody else is going to be the one that sees that pick get made. But yeah, I don't know. I think you two being so far apart on it, I feel like I'm falling somewhere in the middle, where I think the key arguments are the leverage San Antonio had and the Kings, right or wrong, deciding we're not rebuilding. We want a star in here and we're going to try to make the best of it. I guess I think that's probably the wrong choice, but it's the one they made. And in light of that, I guess this package becomes more defensible. And I think, I don't know. It's so easy to say, wait until the off season. Can't you imagine though, that if you do that, the rest of this season is done because you're going to have De'Aaron Fox playing with a foot out the door or not playing. And then you have to, you know what I mean? Maybe it's worth something to turn the second half of this season, if you're the Kings, into a product that fans will care about, as opposed to one that, just, I don't know. I'm just trying to kind of justify me falling in between you two guys.
If you had gone, let's say, the route of just holding him to the offseason, even if you wanted to go the direction of still being competitive, do you think there would have been more value though in, okay, now we're keeping our 2025 first rounder that's owed to Atlanta, where this probably makes it more likely that it conveys, so we're going to up the value of that pick, and then we'll either get a player in here or that sweetens a different type of move we're looking to make. It just, I don't know. If they would have gotten something that made me feel like San Antonio conceded, in the negotiation, if you would have gotten the swap back, if you would have gotten even one of their youngsters, I don't think Vassell or Steph Castle was ever realistic. But you could have gotten Julian Champagny, I might have felt like a little bit better about this deal. And I wanted to talk about this with the Spurs. I'll throw it to you, Grant, but I do think it's germane to the Kings. How do you view it against, okay, well, De'Aaron Fox, let's just paying him moving forward. And the bare minimum, let's say, I don't think he was going to get it Supermax. I don't think he was going to make all NBA, especially with everything that happened. But just looking at it through the context of, okay, a 4-year, $228.6 million extension, does that, again, I want to ask that same question with San Antonio, but with regards to Sacramento, was that part of the calculus here? Are we entirely sure if they were the ones that initiated these talks as reported? Do you think that's part of the calculus of maybe they didn't want to pay De'Aaron Fox like that?
You mean they, being the Kings, didn't want to pay him like that? It's hard for me to imagine, given the Kings' kind of emphasis on winning now and just general willingness to overpay players that are good, not great. If we're going to cite the Sabonis example, and we're going to cite the kinds of players they pursue and prioritize, they love good, not great. Fox is probably closer to great than good, but he's on that spectrum somewhere in between the two. I don't think that was going to be a concern for the Kings. And the Supermax, maybe, but I kind of doubt that too. I actually think, so I hope that answers your question. I actually think we got to talk about the Spurs side of this now, which brings part of that same consideration like into the picture, because depending on what San Antonio does, you could view Fox as a guy that they will pay for 229, and he's their second best player of the first phase of the Wemby era. And is that good enough? Is a fair question. Or maybe he's a guy that you don't view as San Antonio as the second guy. Maybe he's a stopgap until you find a better second. Maybe they envision him being the third option. And is that worth 4 for 229? I think the Spurs side of this is really interesting just because they, out of all these teams, are the ones that have the blankest slate, that have the most options, that are hardest to gauge in terms of a timeline. So I don't know, Mort, maybe you have thoughts on, do you view Fox? Let's just keep it simple to start and take it where you want. Is Fox the Wemby running mate that they, were right to view in that way, or is he something less than that?
I actually consider him less than that, or rather, let me rephrase. What was reported initially as, the Spurs should go all in on De'Aaron Fox, that was an ideology that I disagreed with, because I don't think it's necessarily as clean a fit as a lot of people make it out as. In my personal opinion, I think you need to optimize spacing around Wemby, and you can cheat off of Fox occasionally, especially as a shooter, because, he had that one spike and then it's down to like 33% again from the outside. So the offensive fit I think it's a little bit muddy. The defensive fit I buy immediately, just immediately, because he's such a blur and he's got long arms, athletic as hell.
Has he ever played, with anyone nearly as talented as Steph Castle is on that end of the floor right now? Positionally?
No.
I mean, Davion Mitchell's a very different type of defender.
Yeah.
But
Steph's bigger, yeah.
He's 6 inches smaller.
He's only a
too.
one-position defender, too. Castle might be a 3-position defender.
Sorry,
yeah.
Mark.
No. It's fair. It's a really good question. Actually, I hadn't considered that. That's going to be. Look, I think the Spurs are well on their way to building one of the most ridiculous defenses in the NBA. Honestly, especially when Sohan gets right. He's been in and out of the lineup all year. Imagine when he goes into year 4 next year with all that data under him. Well, all right. I don't know if Fox is that guy, but I think he's good enough to have some level of staying power. And the fact that he's not going to be on a 35% max is going to make it easier. Spurs still have, and this is ridiculous to think about, that they still have 2 years left on Wemby's rookie deal. So they have time to figure this thing out. They have so much flexibility. I mean, have we just fully leaned into the Spurs now? Because I just want to go there.
Well, we fully leaned into the Spurs. So go ahead.
All right, cool. Because can we just talk about how they cooked last night? Can we talk about how, they made James Harden look like, flipping burgers when he was in Houston? I'm a chef. Yeah, no, the Spurs cooked. They cooked. This was ridiculous. They didn't give up the Hawks pick. I was very verbal about that on Blue Sky when everyone's like, that pick has to be given up. Not after the Jalen Johnson injury. No way were they going to look at that and go, yeah, that's movable. No, not without severe protections. That wasn't in the fold. They didn't get off Stephon Castle. They even kept Julian Champagny, as you pointed out, Dan, a player who I think
he was the most important player to protect in this, right?
Right, absolutely.
We agree. Okay.
Yeah, especially when they didn't have Lindy Waters to protect, right? Right, Rand? That's
or Chris Boucher for that matter.
Yeah, but God, that's an A+ to me. That's just a straight A+. They understood how to work that leverage. They got their guy in for a really good price point, to the point where they shouldn't feel bad if that fit doesn't work out and they can flip him later on. There's just nothing I hate about what the Spurs got back here and what they gave up. Complete ownership of that entire train.
I agree with you, and I gave them an A. I think it was an A or an A- when I had to grade it. But if I was to map out the downsides for them, just to play devil's advocate here, I actually think De'Aaron Fox is undervalued as a shooter. He still shoots well on floaters this season. He's hitting over. And this was, ever since the news came out, he's been wonky, but he's still over 35% on step back threes, over 46% on pull up twos. The downsides for me, and we didn't get too much, I guess, into the contract other than the terms. His contract is going to start his age 29 season. And so you figure let's just throw all 4 years on there. So 29, 30, 31, 32, that feels about right. But for someone who still is pretty reliant on athleticism, I'd be curious what that looks like. I think even if the final year is bad, the Spurs they'll be fine. But I do question, Grant, adding into, and I like didn't have time to write about this because I was thinking about it, but I haven't like crystallized any thoughts on it. Does getting him threaten to marginalize one or both of the like Steph, Castle, Jeremy Sohan? And I gravitate towards the latter specifically. I know he's not doing necessarily a ton on the ball, but we're already talking about spacing concerns. And now if you add in someone you view as, I'm assuming they want De'Aaron Fox around for like a couple of years, that is going to like shift the, like maybe not the type of role Sohan needs to play, but maybe the space he's working with or just the number of touches he's even going to get.
I think that's a possibility. I also think that Sohan is not the type of player that you're concerned about marginalizing when you have the opportunity to get someone like Fox. Like Sohan's a good example of I think what's a bigger issue with the Spurs, where because of Wembanyama's ability, we think, to space as a center and basically take nothing off the table, you can afford to have a Sohan out there who does a few things exceptionally well, but has severe limitations. And is that the way to go, right? Can you have sort of specialists like him because you have Wemby, or is that aiming low? And you shouldn't make any concessions like that. You have Wemby, and just because you can have Sohan in a major role doesn't mean you should. You should still be trying to get guys that do what Sohan does plus more. Like, I think it's just a question of how ambitious you want to be building around Wemby. And my inclination would be you ought to be as ambitious as humanly possible, because this guy is going to allow you to make mistakes and take big swings if you want to, and cover for those. So I guess, yeah, I think you're right. Like, it does stand to reason that Sohan will be marginalized somewhat, and maybe Castle doesn't get the on-ball reps you'd want if you want him to grow into the type of player he's going to be. I think with Castle specifically, I just don't know what he's going to be yet. I love him as a prospect, another guy with glaring limitations that matter more because he's a guard, the shooting I'm talking about. I just think if he is what you think he is as the Spurs, then you should probably trust him to figure it out, right? And you would hope that if he is who you think he is, he's undeniably good. And the idea of worrying about how he fits with someone like Fox this early is just not something you should be thinking about. You know what I mean? Like, if you think he's fragile, or you think like, oh, this might stun his growth, then you're kind of admitting he's not the level of prospect you believe him. You're saying you think he is as the Spurs.
And I don't think they think that whatsoever. They have thrown him to the wolves several times this year, and he's done pretty well. The vibe that I got covering this team over the course of a week in Paris as well, and I asked around about Castle, it's just they love him.
Yeah,
they love him.
Just trust him to become whatever he's going to become, and don't worry about Fox maybe getting in the way. Maybe Fox facilitates him becoming the best version of himself. I don't know. It's just the Spurs and Castle and Wemby are so early in their developmental processes that it's like, you know, fit. You got to care about fit to some extent, but because I think we're sort of in agreement that Fox is not the final piece, you know, or anything like that, you can just kind of see what this looks like. And if you don't love it, well, then you didn't give up much to take the trial run with Fox.
Right. And Castle isn't necessarily a point guard either. Again,
learn how to shoot if you want him to play next to Fox, probably on some level.
Right. Yeah. That's a skill-based thing. But I do think, you know, moving forward, the fact that he's so fluid positionally just allows them to use him in whatever capacity. Like, I don't think they're necessarily married to starting him just out of necessity or anything. Like, he's 20 years old. I wouldn't be surprised if he spends the rest of this year and all of next year, like, going in and out of the starting lineup, trying to figure out what is the right way to utilize him. Because, yeah, I just agree. I agree that I don't think they're looking at him like, oh, like the presence of De'Aaron Fox is going to mug it up. Like, he's going to get minutes because Chris Paul's not going to be around forever either. And like Trey Jones just got traded. So like there are going to be plenty of minutes available at those guard spots regardless. Like, that's not something that I would be concerned about. And I doubt very much the Spurs are too. What a home run that they didn't have to give him up. I mean,
what I also do find interesting about this trade though is the timing, because I look at the cost, and I think even if you view this as they had to give up more than 3 first-round picks, like in net, you kind of mapped out what they still have. If we like kind of go through through 2030 draft, there's a chance that in every year, but in 2029, they can at least talk themselves into saying, well, we might have the rights to a pick that could be a lottery pick. Just because this year it might be their own in Atlanta's. They could swap with Atlanta in 26. They have Atlanta's in 27, even though they don't have their own. They can Boston in 2028 as a swap with top 1 protection is just sort of like, but then you also have like the 2030 rights as well. So like just looking at the cost, it makes so much sense. But the timing of, okay, well, they're clearly not contending this season, and maybe they kind of back their way, or not back their way, but get into the play-in. But I wouldn't expect them. Maybe they win it. I wouldn't expect them to. I mean, I guess as Grant likes to say, all things are possible through Wemby, so we shouldn't put a ceiling on it. But do you think what is the timing of this trade say to you? Is it more like, oh, they're going to start really not be reckless, but like they view next year as a time to go for it? Or do you think that there could be another move for them at the deadline? And then also, what is still, when you're looking at this team, we've yet to see them play, of course, but as currently constructed, what do you identify as still like, okay, well, what's like maybe the biggest need or two that they still need to address to optimize what's in place?
Oh, I think they're open-minded towards everything this year. So again,
Wow.
they won just 22 games last year. So we have to remember that already by now they're looking pretty good in terms of the turnaround. Like everything from here is just cream. They're playing with no pressure whatsoever because everyone was like, "Oh yeah, they were one of the worst teams last year," and now they're playing with house money. The fact that they get Fox in, yes, it does come with a certain level of expectation, but not like immediate. Teams and players and fans and everyone kind of knows now, oh, it takes some time for a player of that magnitude to get acclimated and like get into the flow of things. But like the Spurs, as you guys outlined, I mean, Wemby is so incredibly easy to play with. It's also my read on everything I've been hearing, and the players I've talked to is just he's the new plug and play. Remember how Kevin Durant is like the prototypical plug and play guys, so easy to play with? That's Wemby now because of the catch and shoot ability from like 35 feet out. So for Fox to come in, I'm guessing he's going to have an easier transition than most make it out as. And if they suddenly make a push and they get into the playoffs, are we going to sit here with a straight face and say they couldn't win a first round matchup and like go into the second? Like, I'm just not going to put a ceiling on it. Like in terms of the follow-up trade, I think they're open-minded, but I think they're very, very aware that there are certain pieces they're not going to want to pivot off of, like especially Castle and the Hawks picks, which I think they are loving this situation they are in. And that's not, trying to trash Jalen Johnson for going down. That's obviously super disappointing for everyone involved. But like for the Spurs, I could understand why they would be, that pick just got way more juicy. So they have no pressure. Everyone's kind of expecting them to go all in this summer. So they're just sitting there. Yeah, we made one move now. We'll see how far we go. I don't think they have any plans mapped out, Dan, whatsoever.
Grant, do you have anything to add? Even in just if you had a pick, we've talked about it, but I'm just wondering, since the Fox trade, obviously, like, has your impression of like what this team still needs changed at all?
I don't know that it's changed a ton. I do agree that it's just kind of let's figure out what this looks like and we'll adjust as we go forward. What I would add is I think we need to give at least a little bit of thought to the possibility that while the out years of whatever deal Fox signs might be painful because of the athleticism concerns and all that stuff, we need to consider the fact that he might be better than he's ever been right now in this new environment. He's never played with a spacing big. He's never played with look at the wings he's got around him now. Even if, Harrison Barnes, old buddy, but yeah, Keldon Johnson, you got Devin Vassell there. I think there's a chance that Fox in a spaced floor is just like a nightmare. Until he loses that step, which who knows when that might come. It's not going to be this year or next. There's a chance that we agree this trade looks great for the Spurs. It could look better. Like if down the stretch of the season, we see a version of Fox that we never really got to see because he had Sabonis just kind of in the middle of the floor and, helpful in the handoff game. But Fox with no center in the middle of the lane is an interesting thing to think about offensively.
Can I ask you guys something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Keldon Johnson's contract right now, $19 million this year, $17.5 million next year. So it's declining. And then it's staying at 17.5. I know he's not like, a for all teams a certified starter, but like for that compensation level, he should be an asset in some ways. He's probably the one guy I'm looking at. It's like if they make a follow-up trade, before the deadline, he's the guy. Is there a trade that makes sense for him, for you guys, like one that just pops with given the fact that he's got the 19 outgoing?
So if they were to make another change, because I've become around to the fact that like midseason acquisitions are just so tough to integrate, and they've already made a major one. I'm wondering if you could move him. And this is if you went back, what was the year where he like shot the lights out on threes? I probably said some pretty inflammatory things about what he was going to become.
Like 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they kind of need someone who's gonna, I would think, to do that. And so I'm just wondering, like, would you? Because I don't know how low or high, I honestly, after all these years, even the extension that he signed was proof of this. I had no idea what their impressions of him were, and I still don't necessarily have an idea. So, like, would you consider, just as like a name type to throw out there, like a Duncan Robinson archetype on this team?
Oh, I love that. I actually love that because they got Fox now, and because they got the ducks in a row. Like the fact that you can put in someone who is, I know he's developed, but it's fair to call Duncan Robinson primarily a one-trick pony still, right? Like that's
maybe 1.5, because we've seen him
1.5 trick pony. Yeah. Like for him to come in and just bend defenses that way for Wemby, for Fox, for Castle, hell yeah. I love that. I mean, that's a good one.
Cam Johnson. Like you could get there real easy with Keldon and throw. Now we'll keep Champagny off the table, but like Blake Wesley gets you there, and you got all these picks that you didn't give up in this Fox trade to sweeten things. Like I think the point is the Spurs can basically do whatever they. You could throw Johnson and Barnes together. That's like 36 million in 25-26 salary, and if you're not married to Vassell, you can get up to max. Like they can trade for the max guy that Fox maybe isn't. You know, they can sign the guy depending on what you get back for a Vassell trade. Down, it's just every option. You know, all paths are open right now.
I will say I would be fairly surprised if they then because what's the least valuable pick they own right now? I guess it's one of their own moving.
It's all
forward.
Their own. Yeah.
I'd be surprised if they traded another first round pick, is what I was getting at. But it's sort of like they did just trade for De'Aaron Fox, and so is your own 2025 pick really off the table? Might be something that I would wonder about. But I guess you could say you have Atlanta's like, would you prefer to trade your 2026 pick? You could do something like, but that you have a swap on that, so you probably don't want to get rid of it. But I think you guys are right that anything's kind of possible here. Is there anything else on this? Well, Mort, anything else about this trade specifically you want to talk about, or is there anything else that's happening that you don't think is going to become too dated, overarching thoughts you want to get off your chest before?
Yeah, I do. I actually do have a thought, and people are going to laugh.
That's too bad. We're going to end right here. Grant, take a sip.
I do. So people are going to laugh at me for this one because everyone looks at him as a bit of a joke, which I think is ridiculous, like a human victory cigar. Sandro Mamukelashvili. I think this guy is so. You're laughing.
You just wanted to say the name so easily, and flex on us.
No. It took me a long time. Like I couldn't get through that name. But then I met him in LA, and he was super nice to me and my son. I was like, okay, I got to learn it now.
He's like, you're the guy that can say my name. I've heard about
you. You're the one guy. No, but so they gave up Zach Collins in the deal. Obviously, they don't have a lot of size now, and they still have Charles Bassey. Yes, but it feels like the door is open for Mamu now to get more minutes, and I am digging that. I think there's a player in there. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised if he is going to get the minutes at how he produces. The on-court chemistry he's had over the first 2 seasons with Wemby is ridiculous. They know where each other are at all times. It's wild when you watch it in person as well, when you're sitting there watching them on the court. I want to get that in because I have a feeling we're going to see a second half of the season from Mamu that is going to be very, very good. And I just wanted to be on the record about it.
That or unless they're going to trade for a backup big. I really wanted Robert Williams on this team, but now they don't really have with Trey Jones.
Don't you dare. Don't block Mamu. Don't do it.
I don't want to now. I'm sold on him as a future star. Grant, you got anything else on this trade or anything else that's happening around the NBA? You got your KD and LeBron Warriors. Dust off the KD Warriors jersey and get that LeBron to the Warriors jersey.
Yep, I placed that order on NBA.com while we were talking. So I'm all set. I'm all ready for anything to happen. Nothing else to add. I'm afraid of dating this by giving any other trade thoughts.
Well, I did. Did either of you just see? This is a minute to the Giannis comments. He was clearly being facetious, but he was talking about the double standard of star players wanting out versus when franchises want to get rid of them. And then he's like, I want to see Luka to the Lakers. I want to see Nikola Jokic to the Knicks. And so I went through the comment section just to see in the BR app, and the amount of people that like, and it was the video, it wasn't just the transcript. The amount of people that just like, even his tone was just like, oh, he is so gone from Milwaukee that they took away from that. I'm just like, that was not my takeaway at all, but that's what everyone gravitated towards. So I found that, I just wanted to shout that out because I kind of like it when NBA players troll, like basically the news cycle / the content model. That's all I wanted to say.
That's fair.
Oh man. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I just have this rule that whoever owns a blowjob bell should never be taken seriously. That's just my takeaway here.
Ever owns a what?
A blowjob bell. Have you not seen that?
Oh, I didn't. I thought you said low job bell, and I didn't read that.
No. I'm way more dirty than that, Dan. You should know. No, but whenever you own something like that, you're always like, I'm going to take you like 60% seriously at most.
Well, you can get the NBA podcast branded blowjob bells at their store on Mort's OnlyFans link. But actually, Grant, are you ready to take us out of here?
I think we better. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. We got our handles on the bottom of the screen here if you're watching. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mort. Check out Mort's Well, this is a crossover, so if you're listening to this, you know where you're getting it from. You know to follow Hardwood Knocks. Same deal. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.